Morning, Roger Lewis, aka Tone Freaks here, and this is going to be a video discussion live between me and Ranjan Balamgumaran of Financial Eyes. Ranjan's going to be joining me shortly. I've just had a message saying it'll be about 3 minutes. So it's 10:23 here in Sweden. Clocks went back at the weekend, and this morning something piqued a nerve with me. I'm just gonna go to screen share here and just show you the story which I wanted to discuss with Ranjan. So if we just go here, is this story on the BBC? Coronavirus, how my mum became a conspiracy theory influencer. And this chap here is Sebastian Shemirani, and he's the son, an old Etonian no less, of not Anna Breeze, of Kate Shemirani. So here's Kate here, and Kate and Anna Breeze have been in a sort of not a discussion exactly, an exercise whereby each accusing the other of being some sort of controlled opposition or whatever. Now, what's interesting about this is that the narrative of COVID-19 lockdowns and vaccination, the wearing of masks, etc., has provoked much sort of hand-wringing in the mainstream media. Just a simple search on Google yields various results, all effectively attacking people that have given another narrative. Now, Kate Shemirani has been the compere at, I think, 2 of the Trafalgar Square rallies in opposition to the narratives. And it's sort of provoked quite a lot of discussion. Now, here we go. Here we go on BBC Trending. This is the long form interview with Sebastian Shemirani. But then there's also a whole bunch of stuff. You can see October here, 17th, Disinfo Wars and the All-American Troll Farm, QAnon and the Rabbit Hole election. Why do some influence back bad products, etc. I mean, now, the censoring of some some of President Trump's tweets, particularly the New York Post one about the Hunter Biden emails on his computer, etc. None of this sort of noise is new in relation to any particular big issue of the day. And so what I wanted to discuss with Ranjan was this BBC video where Sebastian is basically saying that his mother's sort of, you know, how do you save your own mother from going down the same rabbit hole? And what we haven't got here now is we haven't got Ranjan to join me just yet. This may be a bit rambling kicking off until we get into our stream. So what I did is I cast my mind back to other opposition to narratives. I mean, a famous one is weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which, of course, that whole weapons of mass destruction narrative emerged after the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center. So there is what's called a 9/11 truth movement, okay, where the NIST report on 9/11 has a number of inconsistencies in it, which people have questioned. There's a great film actually called 9/11 in the Academic Community, which is a really interesting film. And if you watch that, and also watch, say, the film Cool It, where there's a whole section about how Bjorn Lomborg, who wrote the skeptical environmentalist that was made into the film Cool It, was effectively singled out for special and unusual punishment, shall we call it, by his peer group or some of his peer group in academia. And that's what the theme of this talk is. Another one is Syria, the Douma gas tax, and say Professor Robertson and there's a media group on Syria. And that group of academics who study media narratives and media studies or whatever have also been singled out and, you know, effectively attacked to try and undermine their standing for making these arguments against different narratives. So, you know, where would one start this story? Perhaps a good place to start is, say, the assassination of John F. Kennedy, JFK. Now, apparently, that assassination did lead to speculation about whether or not Lee Harvey Oswald was the only person who was involved in assassinating President Kennedy. Okay, and just libraries full of books have been written on that subject. If not Lee Harvey Oswald, then who, how, and why? Now, and there are various conjectures about that, some of which actually involve the mafia. I've been watching some interesting mafia films the other day, and there's a guy called Aaron Rusi who was connected to the mafia, and he played Michael in the Godfather trilogy of films. And he claims in a recent interview with Patrick Bet-David on the Valuetainment channel, and there's also, I mean, if you put in Aaron Rusi, Aaron, and you'll find a clip of him talking about the JFK assassination, also the death of Marilyn Monroe, who famously had affairs with both JFK and his brother Robert Kennedy. So that's back then. Fast forward today, and I think it's Robert Kennedy Jr. is a well-known face and advocate for safer vaccines. And he's also been singled out, and curiously enough, members of his own family have kind of disowned him or gone against what he's saying. Not similar to Sebastian and his mother Kate. I mean, that kind of media attack is really fighting dirty, in my opinion. So, and look, here's Ranjan. Let's just get Ranjan on board. Hello, Ranjan. Can you hear me? I can't hear you. Is your mic on? Right, well, you're not muted my end, so I don't think your mic is connected up. Right, we'll just get off the screen capture here. Can you hear me, Ranjan? Okay, well, I can't hear you, so audio default. Guests, here you go. Guest view comments, player sound. There we are. No, right. Well, you should be coming out, but you're not. I can't hear you, Ranjan. Let's see, settings. General. I'm not sure how we're going to resolve this, Ranjan. Hold on, add to stream. No, we don't want to do that. Right, so we're both there. Unmute mic. I'm really not sure why I can't hear you, Ranjan. Have you got any Bluetooth stuff on? Hold on. 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. Right, I'm looking at the stream, Ranjan, on the live feed on Twitter, and your voice isn't coming out. Can you say something again? Right, Ranjan seems to have disappeared off. I guess he's going to try and get his mic working. So anyway, where were we? Robert Kennedy Jr. and obviously, you know, his family sort of disavowing some of the things that he says. Oh, here's Ranjan again. Add to stream.
I'm back.
Hello.
I'm back.
There we are. And there's sound.
Can I be slightly boring and technical? So I've got a MacBook, and so on the settings, you've got a choice of either having it on headphones or multi. And I had it on multi, and I switched it to headphones. So for future reference, cool, on the StreamYard. Right, brilliant. Well, you're coming through loud and clear now, so that's good. So anyway, for the audience, Ranjan is near Paddington in good old London. Yeah, I'm actually so near Kilburn, Maida Vale, around there, in London, County Kilburn. And I'm in my house in Sweden, and Ranjan and I are friends, and I've been back and forth to UK quite a lot this year on business. And anyway, I sent Ranjan a couple of messages on Skype earlier. I just did an introduction, Ranjan, where I was sort of saying about the BBC interview with Sebastian
Shirwami, or however you say it, about his mother, Kate. And what I was saying was that she's being accused of being a conspiracy theorist. So I went back to the JFK assassination and said that that is somewhere where the official narrative was having challenges. And I was about to make the point that apparently the appellation conspiracy theorist was actually introduced by the CIA to the US press at the time, saying, look, people are speculating about this. We want to put them off doing that. Please refer to them as conspiracy theorists, because that will put them in a bracket which people can kind of point at, laugh at, or say, that's a bad thing to be doing. Now, fast forward to the current COVID-19 lockdown, mask and vaccination narratives. Now, I think those four things, it's not controversial to say that those four subjects are live in respect of the current establishment narrative of a pandemic. And
could you just say them again? What are those for again?
It is masks, lockdown, vaccination. Yeah, and obviously the flu pandemic itself, right?
Yeah.
So it's uncontroversial, I think, that those are
the topics.
That they are topics of some concern that dominate the news flow in the mainstream media at the moment. Okay, so what we're actually talking about is those four topics and discussion around them. Now, so on the vaccine point, okay, on the JFK assassination, I mentioned Robert Kennedy, who was also assassinated, but Robert Kennedy's son, Robert Kennedy Jr., is actually in the news because he made a film called Vaxxed, or produced a film called Vaxxed 2, which is questioning the safety of some vaccines, not all vaccines. So all people who question the efficacy of some vaccines are not what you'd call anti-vaxxers, okay? But Kate Shirwami, as a holistic medicine nurse, as a nurse, has been put into that bracket, number one, as an anti-vaxxer, number two, as someone who's against the wearing of masks, and also against the lockdown strategy, all connected with this establishment narrative of a pandemic. Okay.
Yep. Okay.
Right. So there are other characters involved, such as David Icke, Piers Corbyn, and
someone called Piers Robinson. I'm not sure who he is, but
Piers Robinson is the media group on Syria. He's a professor of media studies.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure, possibly in Nottingham or somewhere like that.
Academic.
He's an academic who is often writes with Vanessa Beeley, and Vanessa Beeley obviously is a journalist on the ground in Syria, and there is a briefing against her at the moment from the BBC. Now, what I was actually wanted to lay out is, and discuss with you, a history of what controlled opposition and gatekeeping with respect to resistance against dominant establishment narratives. Okay. Now, so starting off with the proto one, if you like, say JFK, right? JFK assassination. Okay. Gulf of Tonkin incident, anyone? I mean, that's another one. In fact, that's one that turned out to be a conspiracy theory that became a proven conspiracy fact, for instance.
When did that take place, the Gulf of Tonkin?
It was the casus belli for the start of the Vietnam War.
Right. So 1960, around then, 60, 61.
Yeah, well, it was in the early 60s because
okay.
the Vietnam War was started by Truman, I think, who took over from JFK. I mean, it covers a whole sweep of stuff. So it's not a history test or
no,
sort of
sure, yeah.
But what I want to
saying this stuff happens, yeah.
Conspiracy theories, conspiracy facts. What are they? What is a conspiracy theorist? And my first answer to that is that I actually prefer Professor Lance DeHaven's terminology, and he's come up with a thing called SCADs, which is state crimes against democracy, and he coined that. I don't know what you'd call it. It's a term, I suppose, to cover the whole of the 9/11 question marks. And with 9/11, that's one thing. Of course, weapons of mass destruction did prove to be an overreaction, an exaggeration. You know, the yellow cake, the tubes, whether they were manufacturing, can strike within several minutes, all that sort of thing. And people who questioned the 9/11 narrative, 9/11 truth as they're called, the weapons of mass destruction thing kind of grew out of the war on terror, so the invasion of Afghanistan and the invasion and occupation of Iraq. That's kind of another one. Then another keystone in all of this is the Seattle protests against the
World Trade Organization in 1999, yeah,
right, which I would say is probably the beginning of the current narratives emerging regarding the Great Reset, because at the same time as we've got this establishment pandemic narrative, we also now have a very strong Great Reset narrative, right, which is morphing into a discussion not only about vaccinations and how you keep a population healthy by vaccination as opposed to whole medicine and prevention being better than cure. You have this pivoting, they call it in politics. It's pivoted from being only about that to being, we need a reset, and we need a reset because climate change, right?
Can I just come in?
Yeah.
So far we've been talking about events, and we've been talking about interpretation of events, and possibly reframing. So that interpretation and reframing.
You're breaking up now, Ranjan. Hello? We interrupt this broadcast.
Yeah, I think we're back.
Yep. Oh, right, cool.
So there's a series of events that we talked about, some in the 60s and the 40s, and then coming closer. The reframing in order to stop people from causing trouble. And then you were talking about 99, 2001, and the Iraq War. So what I find interesting about the 99, 2001 thing is that the 99, that wasn't in the script. The World Trade Organization were just supposed to say, right, consensus, everyone agrees. Even if they don't agree, we can basically manufacture something that looks like an agreement, and we'll have trading rules for all countries, and everyone has this bar that has been set. And so there was opposition. People were saying, farmers in South Korea, etc., people around the world coming together and opposing it in Seattle with trade unions, etc. Then when September 11th happens, the anti-globalization movement had been growing and growing and growing and growing. And then suddenly you have, is it the Patriot Act, Homeland Security, all of this kind of stuff, which is really criminalizing dissent in the US, as far as I know. And I mean, I wasn't there, I was over here. And then by the time you get to 2005, the Iraq War has, and you have this other public relations coup, Gordon Brown and Tony Blair, where try to say we're the kings.
That's breaking up again, my end, Ranjan. I'm not sure how good the buffering of StreamYard is.
I'm okay here now again. So you have Roger, are you there?
Yeah,
Roger,
I'm here.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm concentrating on what you're saying, hanging on every word, Ranjan.
Yeah, of course, thank you. So you have these events over time, and then the reframing of events, depending on your perspective. So I know that I was way out on the left for most of this stuff, and so there's the permanent reframing. So every time those of us who were lingering on the left thought, oh, okay, look, we're making some progress, there'd be some massive terror attack, and then afterwards rights were taken away and conversation was changed. And so the merging of when you're bringing in the global reset, I find that extremely interesting intellectually, but practically, because of the way in which the level of conspiracy theory, as a, you know, quote unquote, as a, it's got so high. So the level to which governments can't be trusted has led to an increase in people doing the questioning, and the amount of questioning is so across the board that now you could have what would be called a left conspiracy theory or a right conspiracy theory, and now everything appears to have completely gone out the window, because it feels as though there are simultaneously lots of people clamoring for lockdown and lots of people clamoring for reasonable behavior on the basis that there aren't that many people actually dying of COVID at all, certainly this time around. Yeah, I think the reset and the climate change, what I find very interesting is how the left are brought on board for authoritarian government against themselves. That I think that's really clever how that's happened, where people maybe on the center, on the left, are begging for lockdown, begging to have rights taken away from them, and at the same time feeling okay about telling the Tories, you know, you need to be feeding children, etc., which obviously they do need to be doing. But just the way in which the so-called common sense left mind has been hijacked completely and doesn't even know which way it's facing, because the corporates have taken over climate change as an idea, big pharma, all of this stuff, the weapons industry, they're having it the way they like now.
Right.
There doesn't seem to be much. The resistance is all called conspiracy theory, and it's all called right-wing conspiracy theory now.
Yes,
that's my take. I mean, do you see that?
Well, there are a number of convenient sort of labels that we tend to put on things so we can stand them to one side and then talk about something else. Those labels tend to end up having people talking about labels as opposed to what you're trying to stick labels onto. So personally, I don't think left or right is a helpful demarcation, because most people are a mixture of some things left, some things right, or some things that are called left or called right.
Okay.
So a better generalization is authoritarian or libertarian, in my view, because you can have, you know, left or right libertarians, left or right authoritarians. So I quite like, I was telling you yesterday about that political compass thing, which is an interesting thing that people can do. What's interesting about that, the front page of that website at the moment has got Donald Trump in the top right hand corner and Biden in the top right quadrant, not supposedly still authoritarian and still right, but not as far as Donald Trump. Now, I think Donald Trump is a mixture of libertarian and authoritarian, and probably Joe Biden is as well. I think people generally are, because according to your own, call it a moral compass, different people have different attitudes. Like
I think just from my perspective on this, I think they agree on far more than they disagree, and that's what matters if you don't live in the US. I think for the point of view of over here, I think they agree on a lot. It's domestic stuff. They're arguing about a lot of domestic things, I think. And Trump doesn't really want to go walkies anyway. I don't think he wants to start a war abroad, whereas Biden probably does.
Yeah, which should, I mean, that's the thing that perhaps should interest most of us. You know, I mean, there are lots of people all over the world who think, "Oh, good, yeah, that's a great," you know, that's actually a good thing. What I wanted to talk about, though, was that you have these issues, you have these events, okay, and then you have these narratives about them, and what we call the mainstream media and the narrative that's put out there. So whether it's a corporate narrative, a government narrative, or elitist narrative, or a populist narrative. So, you know, you again, labels. And when does a populist become a conspiracy theorist? Are all populist positions on issues surrounding events and policies founded in conspiracy, or is a conspiracy theorist a handy label not to listen to the arguments? That's my position. That's the position that I take in respect of Kate Shirawami. Now, there's a sub question regarding Kate Shirawami, who has, it seems, accused another journalist called Anna Breeze of being a shill or a stooge or a controlled opposition or a gatekeeper type thing. Right now, my own personal view is that both of them may be, both of them may not be. It doesn't actually necessarily matter. What's important is the arguments that they're making. If someone is funding someone to make arguments, and they're making arguments that are being paid for, such as, say, Daniel Defoe's pen, which was a hired pen in, you know, back in the days of the bubonic plague, etc.
Yeah, he switched sides because he was broke. Yeah,
he was like he was a spin doctor of that age. So, you know, we know what spin doctors are. But we have a class of politicians that sort of says, you know, well, leave our spin alone. You know, spin is what we do because that's what we are. But
it has effects. That's the problem. I wouldn't mind if it was just on the theatre.
Well, when does a spin doctor's narratives become a conspiracy narrative?
It's a very good question, this, isn't it? Especially in the run up to an election. So as you were saying, you've got those two, but you were talking about populism and conspiracy theory, and you were saying how conspiracy theory can be used in order to not listen to somebody as a label.
Well, the label is undoubtedly meant to throw people off their stride, to make them feel uncomfortable. I mean, I've read a lot about the philosophy of conspiracy theories, and I did a reading of. Can you hear me, Ranjan? I still seem to be chatting away. Anyway, Complots of Mischief by a New Zealand academic called Charles Pidgeon, which is based on the Shakespeare play, which has slipped out of my head already. Ralph Fiennes plays it brought into a modern setting. Ranjan seems to have just gone off to try and reboot, I think. But Complots of Mischief, as I say, is this poem, which is based on a philosophical paper. In the introduction to it, Charles Pidgeon actually talks about a book of philosophy written by, which one was it? Hume. David Hume wrote a book, and in this book about philosophy that Hume wrote, he mentions the word conspiracy something like 150 times. You'll find it on my YouTube channel. Ranjan?
Yeah, I'm back.
Yeah, cool. I was just talking about Complots of Mischief and Charles Pidgeon's introduction to it, where he there's a book by David Hume which mentions conspiracy theory, or conspiracy is mentioned, and another word for conspiracy, something like 150 times in this whole book. The idea that conspiracies don't exist is just patently ridiculous. It's an absurd proposition.
What, that they don't exist?
Yeah, of course they exist. I mean, there's a law of criminal conspiracy. It exists. Two or more people conspiring in secret to get a certain outcome.
I think it means to breathe the same air. So basically, if you and I have a chat about something and we say in future we will behave thus, that's arguably a conspiracy because we've.
So in terms of conspiracy theorist as a label, okay, my at this point of our discussion, I would say let's put that to one side, because this is not a talk in defense of conspiracy theory. Okay, we'll proceed on a predicate that conspiracies exist. Of course they exist. It's absurd to suggest otherwise. But that's not what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about.
Can I just mention something? Can I just mention something just before you do? And it's not to change the topic at all. It's Robert Anton Wilson, who wrote the Illuminatus trilogy, was the editor of the letters section of Playboy magazine in the 60s. And he got a very interesting mailbag, him and his colleague, Robert Shea. Lots of people sent lots of posts in saying, what's going on? It's the 60s. We're bombing Vietnam. Why? Blah, blah, blah. And then when he wrote the Illuminatus trilogy and other work, people said, oh, you're such a conspiracy theorist. You keep on saying this and that. That George Washington was switched by Adam Weishaupt as a double in the 18th century, the Illuminati, and blah, blah, blah. All of these different things. And he said, I'm not actually a conspiracy theory. I don't believe any of these things. I just collect them. There's so many of them. I collect them and I share them. And there are so many there that as soon as you talk about anything, then you get accused of being a conspiracy theorist. But actually, all you're doing is talking about things.
Well, it's effectively an ad hominem attack, which is a distraction from an argument that anyone's making. You may as well sort of say you're fat, or you're thick, or you're, I don't know, or you shat your pants or something. It's a puerile nothing. It's not an argument.
Sure.
Okay. So so what I'm saying is, right, okay, there's a label that you stick on people to shut them up, but what are they actually saying? Right. So what are they saying? Now, the next question, which is an interesting question, is why are they saying it? Right. So, for instance, why is Anna Bree saying what she says about if a vaccine is available, okay, would you take it? Right. And the fact that she says, well, as long as people have got a choice, my body, my choice, that's a consistent argument. Okay. Now, Kate has a different position in that quite a few vaccines have been proven to be harmful. If you look that, even if you read the instructions on some of them, there are side effects which are not publicized. So the idea of compulsory vaccination with a new vaccine, right, is a question of some concern. Okay, I think it's concerning. If someone's saying to me, we have this and we're going to inject it in you, the person that's manufactured it has a basically exemption from liability if it does you harm.
That's true, isn't it? That's true, isn't it? They have an exemption from liability, right?
Apparently, yes.
Yeah, that's a bit of a problem, isn't it?
I think it's a legitimate question to say, well, hold on a second. What's in this thing? Why have they got this exemption from liability? And surely it's not the place of my government to say you have to take this. This is the idea of masks as well. You wear a mask to protect other people, not to protect yourself. They say the same thing about vaccines, and that there are a number of logical inconsistencies in that argument that if one child is unvaccinated, say for months, and all the other children are, how is that unvaccinated child putting those other children at risk? Now, I don't know, that there may be lots of answers to that question, right? But it seems to me it's a legitimate question to ask, and roars of disapproval and conspiracy theorists aren't arguments against that question. You know, sort of say, well, hold on a second. If masks work, if vaccines work, if you voluntarily take the vaccine and therefore you're protected, you know, and then how far do you go with it? So that, you know, again, there are steps in a process that starts from the initial proposition, if you will. And so so there's this debate. Okay, so I see two intelligent women, okay, articulate women who have concerns, and they are making arguments which are different choices. Okay, you know, whether you choose to go, whether you cast your lot with one argument or the other argument is your business. I'm not saying that one or other of them is right. They may both be wrong. They may both be right in certain circumstances. But the next question is, why are they saying it? Are they sponsored to say that? Now, are they saying it to control the narrative, or to trip up some sort of opposition coalescing in a united front against a dominant narrative?
I see. Okay.
So this is where the question of controlled opposition or gatekeepers come in. And it doesn't matter to me whether someone's a gatekeeper or controlled opposition, that they exist. I mean, it doesn't upset me that, I mean, logically they would exist. I mean, if I was a benign dictator or whatever, or any democracy, I would be more surprised if that didn't exist, you know, than the fact that it does. My own view in terms of, you know, how do you deal with it is well, you listen to the arguments and you make the counter arguments and you get that out there. So what seems to happen though with organized opposition to dominant narratives is attacks happen that it's a divide and rule thing. So the job is done once you get people arguing against each other, which has happened in the 9/11 truth movement, which has happened in the 7/7 truth movement. It's definitely a strategy with respect to people who oppose the climate alarmism agenda. And it seems to be happening now with the anti-lockdown, anti-mask, anti-compulsory vaccine thing. And it's perfectly possible to have a different position on those three questions, right? Because,
yeah,
you know, they are open questions with many variables. And so if one is to have an open and enriching discussion about these questions, okay, the starting point shouldn't be assuming bad faith on the other side, but also in a grown-up way accepting that, of course, some people may be acting with a motivation which is, you know, like, for instance, take 77 Brigade, which is the Signals Regiment hired troll division of the British Army, which, what's he called? Tobias Elwood, Lieutenant Colonel Tobias Elwood is the commanding officer of that outfit.
I don't know if he still is. I don't know if he still is. He was.
Yeah, maybe. I think he is. Yeah.
Oh, really?
So 77 Brigade, okay, they're paid trolls. Another group that has a lot of paid trolls is Monsanto. Monsanto famously have a lot of paid trolls. News organizations at News at 10. Most of those people you see in the background of the news on News at 10, they're actually spamming. You know, that's what they're doing. So Cambridge Analytica, and all of that stuff about Brexit. It's just modern mass communication trying to steer a narrative or steer a mindset in one direction. The nudge thing. The UK column talks about this nudge thing and this seeking to control people's
choice architecture.
Processes.
Choice architecture. Human beings are predictably irrational, so you've got to funnel them into the right place.
So this is your man Gert Gigerenzer, isn't it?
Well, he says the opposite. Yeah, he says that those people who say that are going to take your liberties away from you.
Yeah, well, I agree with Gert. I agree with that. I think it's very dangerous. I find it deeply offensive at a philosophical level. But hey, I'm not seeking to impose that view on anyone else. For me, it doesn't float my boat. I don't like authoritarian or,
I think they called it libertarian paternalism. That was the word they came up with, which is a contradiction, but
of course. We were talking the other day, Ranjan, and you mentioned we were talking about someone, I can't remember who it was, and you sort of said they're a bit like a Mary Whitehouse. Who was that?
It was Owen Jones.
Owen Jones, that was it. We were talking about Owen Jones
because of the outrage.
Yes, and what I said about him is that he is a good interviewer. I mean, he comes out with quite a bit of stuff which I don't necessarily agree with, but he's a great interviewer, and he does an interview with Peter Hitchens, and I do agree with a lot of what Peter Hitchens says. I might not agree with some of his prescriptions for what he says happened, but Peter Hitchens seems to me to be clinging on to some sort of journalistic objectivity, whilst at the same time saying, well, if left to me, I would prefer this to happen. But he's not confusing the two things. His opinions and his reporting of the news are clearly demarcated in his own writing.
Sure. Peter's got his limits as well, and there are certain things that his lawyers won't let him do, so he doesn't do them.
Yeah.
But
we all. I mean, yes. So those are imposed limits, but we also have our own.
Yeah, sure.
Self-imposed limits or self-editing, self-censorship, that sort of thing. So let's get back to this point about controlled opposition, gatekeepers, and then another useful term is useful idiots, right? So useful idiots are people who are encouraged to do stuff because they are causing problems for your own for your own opponent, and obviously you'll encourage them to do it. And it was Lenin that coined the term useful idiot. So do I think that Kate or Anna are useful idiots? No, I don't. I don't personally think they're idiots at all. I think they're both intelligent women. I'm sure they'd be interesting people to sit down with, both of them, and have a chat with, right? What tends to happen, though, is when people are attacked the way that they're being attacked, it's natural for us all to become self-defensive about it, right? Now, just on another issue here, or another person, there was what's she called now? I forget her name now. There was someone who was prosecuted for writing anti-Semitic songs. And she started off by making some claims about the Holocaust, and then she was pilloried, and people were trying to take her living away from her, i.e., she was a cruise ship entertainer, there's one song she wrote about the Holocaust which is really offensive, and it definitely is anti-Semitic. Right. My view on that is I wouldn't outlaw it, but I would argue with the with the propositions within it.
Right.
And Alison Chablot, she was called Alison Chablot. And I wrote a blog about it. Tommy Robinson as well. both of them say things I fundamentally disagree with. But again, by no platforming, getting rid of, scoring out their social points or whatever, okay, what it does is it forces people into a more extreme position where maybe they can get some shelter or comfort, and so in a way it doesn't help. It doesn't shine light on stuff, and that's so controlled opposition, gatekeepers, right? Movements where people want to place legitimate arguments which aren't being made, and legitimate arguments aren't being made with respect to this current pandemic, the reporting and the fiddling with the statistics and all this sort of thing. It's legitimate to say that Professor, is it Neil Ferguson, his model is crap, and they're seeking to use it again. Balances projections, which were not a prediction, famously in September. They're way off. This idea that PCR tests are laden with false positives, and a case is not necessarily an infected person.
I can't at this stage. I can't stress enough to anyone who's watching this to again have a look at the work of this chap called Gerd Gigerenzer, because false positives, manipulation of statistics, the taking away of your liberties, all of this stuff, it's all in there. He doesn't concentrate on the liberty being taken away, but the idea that we are slaves to our desires and that we have to be funneled into this or funneled into that whole nudge thing. The way the government is basically, as you say, manipulating statistics. Yeah. And when I say manipulating statistics, all I know is, for example, what they count. They change what they count. Mm-hmm. First it's this and then it's that. So it's all done in order to make the numbers look big, not to be consistent from one day to the next about what they're counting. But yeah. Sorry.
So when a rat is smelt, as it were, and people sort of say, well, hold on a second, we're not sure we're having this. Let's put our heads together and let's what have you got to say about this then?
Yeah.
And when people start saying, well, hold on a second, what about this then? they're being shut down. Oh, you're a conspiracy theorist, or well, we're the expert. You're arguing with an expert. So tell me, where did you go to medical school? All of that sort of. I saw this argument put to Juliet Hartley Brewer.
Yeah, right.
Again, another intelligent woman asking good questions, like Kate, like Anna, right? Okay, and she was interviewing Patrick Jenkin, who's a spook ex-cabinet minister, whatever, still on the security committee, all that sort of thing.
So he's an MP, Tory MP.
Yeah, Patrick Jenkin, right? And
you mean Bernard, don't you?
Bernard Jenkin.
That guy. Yeah. Okay.
He took this very patrician attitude towards Julia, sort of like
he did, but he didn't ask her where she went to medical.
No, but it was a similar sort of thing. I mean, that's that. It's a little undermining someone's position in an argument based on, well, you're not an expert. Is Obama famously used to say about, so if you want someone to land the plane, you want it to be a pilot, don't you? Yeah.
Okay, I've got you now.
Yeah, I was saying another variation on it is Obama used to be fond of saying, look, if you want someone to land the plane, you want it to be a pilot, don't you?
Right.
So they're little sort of aphorisms that people trot out to sort of say, okay, you might have a point there, but because of who you are, what you are, I'm going to pull rank on you, right? And it's a way of closing down discussion. Okay, I happen to think discussion is healthy, and well, as you know, you and I talk for hours on Skype sometimes. Yeah. And mercifully for people that may happen on, say, a YouTube video here or there, we're not given to recording all of them. But like I said today, I had all these windows open, and I wanted to discuss with you this point, and this is the point. So here's the point. When people are saying, hey, what about this then? And enough of them are getting together, and so they've joined up into a movement or a front of opposition, okay? Where a movement is identified, it gets infiltrated, right? Now, our discourse on social media is infiltrated by definition, whether you're on Google, Facebook, or whatever you're doing with the analytics, you're being tracked, come what may. But this idea that if there's a movement, it will then get infiltrated. And so that's when we come to the Occupy movement, okay? And so that was the kickback against the austerity narratives following the 2008 crash, the global financial crisis. And when Cameron came in, and he and Osborne basically made the wrong economic choices, condemning the British public to austerity and blowing up bubbles for what became called the 1%. So then you had the 99% Occupy movement. They produced something called the 99% Declaration in the US, which was very good. People like Steve Bannon made films about Occupy, and the guy that founded Breitbart, the guy that died, what was his name?
Breitbart, Andrew Breitbart, maybe?
Is that what it was? It was called something else, Andrew something else. It wasn't Breitbart, was it? Was his name Breitbart? It was called Andrew something or other.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's the same guy. I think he was the producer of these films that Steve Bannon made, and then Steve Bannon had an association with Breitbart. The other people interested in Breitbart is Milo Yiannopoulos or whatever he's called.
Yeah, Milo Yiannopoulos. Yeah,
I went to have a look the other day to see what he was up to. I mean, I can remember I once saw him on some sort of BBC Vox Pops thing, and he was introduced as a British constitutional expert. He was talking about something like Princess Di's dresses or something. I was deeply offended by the fact that he was supposed to be a constitutional expert.
Course,
as far as I could see, he had absolutely no chops in the field of constitutional law whatsoever, as far as I could see. But that doesn't disqualify him from having an opinion, of course. But it wasn't presented as his opinion. He was being presented as an expert, which
it's an example of what you're talking about, right? Yeah.
Now, so it's the same way. It's a little bit like giving the certificate to the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz. I have this certificate, therefore I am an expert. Or Lucian and the illiterate book collector, that sort of thing. Conferring a gong on someone, i.e. Nobel Peace Prize to Henry Kissinger, Obama, but not Donald Trump, go figure. So infiltration of movements. First of all, there has to be a movement to infiltrate. Okay. But what passes for a movement these days is usually controlled opposition, like Extinction Rebellion, right? I think that's a manufactured controlled opposition. And so another thing I went to was Mark Windows of Windows on the World did an excellent series about back in Occupy, about the Occupy infiltration, and then about XR Rebellion and how that is a manufactured organization, which is really, it's controlled opposition merged with a kind of a gatekeeper type vibe. Black Lives Matter, I would say the same thing. Positive Money now has been infiltrated and subverted. Now, the early days of Occupy, which had anarchist roots, was that you don't have a leader, because if you have a leader or a leadership structure, it is open to being subverted. It's much better to have a distributed cell-like structure, because it is more robust. You find this in computing as well. And so But once people start coalescing around someone and offering up a leader, can't help but think of Life of Brian here. Like, he's not the Messiah, he's a very naughty boy. You end up with a lot of very naughty boys, right? Some of who are like Judas taking the, is it 30 pieces of silver?
Yeah.
So what seems to be happening now is that the arguments which are being fielded by people like Anna Brees, like Kate, I can't say her surname, but
Shirami, I can't remember.
Kate Shirami, right? Her own son being used to brief against her on the BBC. Don't go down this rabbit hole.
You sent me that this morning, and he's a young former Etonian investment bank.
So the very existence of something like 77 Brigade, of the GCHQ rules for disrupting internet forums, the Monsanto form in doing this commercially, the Cambridge Analytica operation, we call it that, right? That all exists. So, I mean, you would, of course, you would, wouldn't you? I mean, if you're trying to sell your own wares, why wouldn't you do it? That's the point. And it isn't illegal.
I thought
but then you have this idea of people who infiltrate things being above the law. They're allowed to do illegal things to catch bad people, right? And that's another part of this question, another part of this idea here. So all I'm really saying to Kate and Anna is put your heads together and find your common ground, right? In terms of the wisdom of Solomon, okay, the famous story of the two mothers, one who has a child who has died, and they're arguing over a living baby and both claiming that baby. And King Solomon reasons, right, well, I'm going to cut the baby in half and you can have half each. Of course, it'd be a dead baby, but they have half each. And one of the women is okay with that, and the other woman is absolutely not okay with that. And that is the mother he gave the child to. Right now,
why are you narrating King Solomon's?
Well, simply because what you've got here is you've got two people set in opposition to each other. Are they controlled opposition? Are they paid shills or whatever? I mean, if they have an interest in their own arguments, they will resolve those arguments. If they continue arguing as they are, to me, they're like the woman who's saying, "Oh right, I'm all right with the baby being chopped in half." That it's a poor analogy.
I just say this at this stage. Oh God! Every time I say anything, we cut.
Well, obviously, 77 Brigade or GCHQ believe you're making more sense than me, Ranjan.
Roger.
Yeah, I'm here. I can hear you. Yeah, well, you're back with me. You're in my cans. Yep.
Okay, I think I'm back.
Yep.
So at this stage, an hour into our chat, I feel...
Has it been an hour? Good Lord.
An hour since you started. But I think at this stage, you have described events, phenomena, and the way that it has been going. And I'm just wondering, are we going to jump from description to prescription in any way? What I mean is, I feel that you've outlined a lot of what's going on for me. Where should we be thinking that things might be going? Is that right. Where we're going?
Yeah. Okay. So I have a question for you. Who is George Barder?
George is someone who I know through Occupy. So I turned up a bit late to Occupy. So it started in September 2011. I went down there a couple of times, and there were a bunch of working groups. One of them, so different committees in a way. One of them was called the Economics one. The other one was called the Environment, Energy and Equity one. There were other ones. There was one for democracy, one for faith, different ones. I don't remember seeing George at any of the meetings myself, actually, but a lot of them may have happened before I got there. He was a fundraiser for a charity, I think an environmental charity, possibly Greenpeace, and he was one of the main organizers of something called Occupy Democracy, where we went to Parliament in 2014 to occupy Parliament Square. Yeah, he seems pretty well informed on things. I think he may have been studying to become a lawyer at one point, and as a result of that, well, not as a result, he's well informed about laws that are coming in and things like that. That's what I found. So we've hung out quite a lot. He talks quite a lot about things, but so do I. So yeah, we got on okay. And he was involved in the thing called the Compassionate Revolution, and then which became Extinction Rebellion.
Okay. Can you see the screen share on your screen?
I can indeed.
Is that George Barder?
No.
Where it says before we start. Who's that then?
This person here, that is Mark. What's his name? I can't remember his surname, but he's called Mark. I do remember accusing him of being a copper, and other people doing it.
I thought that was George, you see.
No, this is not George. This is not George. This is someone called Mark. I can't remember his surname.
Because I know George Barder is mentioned in this film, and this is a Windows on the World film, and this is at Occupy, and this is Occupy in the Bank of Ideas.
Yeah, so George. I think George appeared on the TV quite a lot. So he was the go-to person, and he would appear on the telly quite a lot. This person, I can't remember his name. It was Mark. I know that we didn't exactly get along, me and this guy, but he got on well with other people who I knew.
Right, because fast forwarding to Extinction Rebellion, George Barder was involved in that, and Mark Windows and Piers Corbyn talking about Occupy in a later. There we are. We'll just get it on the screen here. Oh, my screen is freezing now.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say George is a bit of a strategist in some ways, you know, in the background.
Well, I think with Extinction Rebellion, that's true, but I think he had a more operational role in his infiltration of the Occupy movement. And this guy here, like you said, you remember suspecting him of being a police officer. Whether he is,
I told him that's what I thought. Yeah. So,
well, you know. Kelvin and this other guy, he's being basically examined or put to proof, if you like, by Kelvin Oberon, who's a poet, and another guy whose name I can't recall, and I can't scroll back and forth through the video now because it's frozen on my screen.
Yeah, now, can I just say something on the subject of whether or not either of these two people are in the pay of anybody to do with the government or the state? Personality-wise, they wouldn't like me to say this, but I possibly share something in common with them, which is that I talk a lot, and so do they. And so I think they end up performing what look like leadership roles in what's supposed to be a non-hierarchical organization.
Well, they're facilitators. They are exactly facilitating these supposed meetings, which, what's it called?
That's the word.
Sortition.
Well, I don't know if this was an example of sortition here, but yeah, they are. I suppose it is. I mean, it's a small group, and the ideas move around, and they do kind of facilitate. I suppose, yeah.
Well, Bannon in his films about Occupy, particularly Zuccotti Park, where they all repeat stuff, and I've seen David, the late David Graeber, sort of having him, he's been repeated when he's addressed large groups. Extinction Rebellion do it all the time, but the first time I saw it was in Zuccotti Park. Now, whether that started as a popular thing and they latched onto that and realized it's a good way to sort of...
Oh, they definitely did not create that. That is not a new process.
Yeah.
I remember nearly 20 years ago being in a meeting where people were doing this to indicate that they agree. And then there's these other things as well. And I remember at the time, I mean, I guess as with other things, there are conditions under which that might work better and conditions under which it might not.
I mean, Mark Windows is brilliant on all this stuff. I mean, I think. So anyway, that's the Occupy movement. Then you got Extinction Rebellion. Between the two, and at the time of Occupy, there was something called the People's Voice, which was a YouTube-based platform.
David Icke, right?
David Icke was behind it. Gareth Icke was a presenter, presented a brilliant music show. And the People's Voice had a lot of people, Sonia Poulton, oh God, who's he called? The guy that broadcasts from Manchester now, the Irish guy. Anyway,
Richie Allen.
Richie Allen. Richie Allen. They all were part of and grew out of that movement, and they all fell out. Right. Well, you told me there was a big thing about someone running off with a bunch of Bitcoin, because I think you had some. What was Drew involved in it? I think
he was.
Not sure.
He was. Yeah.
So I can remember we were discussing it, and you see, David Icke's got a new platform called Iconic, which is very good. I subscribe to it.
Okay.
And of course, David Icke is the big bad monster of conspiracy theorists. That's how he's painted. Now, two British people, certainly of my age, can't discuss David Icke without talking about the Terry Wogan interview and the Lizards. The Lizards is a standby. If you don't want to talk about David Icke, you mention Lizards. If you want to talk about David Icke, you have to say Lizards, put that on one side. What else is he saying? Right? But with David Icke, it's Lizards and conspiracy theorists. There are like two of them. Now, what Alex Jones, who's another conspiracy theorist that people like to demonize, what he says about David Icke and the Lizards is it's the turd in the punch bowl. And right, so some people say it's because he wants to disguise some sort of latent anti-Semitism. It's interesting. There's an article in the Jewish Chronicle about Kate Shirami, and again, obviously, in the Jewish community, there are perfectly justified fears of extreme right-wing ideologies, i.e., Nazism and anti-Semitism coming from that place. Now, and understand that I don't think David Icke is anti-Semitic. I don't think he's very, to me, what he's putting forward is, take Brian Rose at London Real and the interviews he's done with him. The main takeaway you always get from David Icke is kind of love and peace, man. He's kind of like, everyone's favorite hippie uncle that drinks real ale in a way that perhaps has an embarrassing sort of dancing style at weddings. I'm
not taking that away from David Icke, to be honest, but because the things that he talks about are so serious that I don't walk away with a completely harmless feel to it, because
look, I like David Icke. I would love to have a few beers with him and Gareth. I mean, to me, I think they're great blokes. We would probably disagree about Israel and Palestine, me and them. Okay, not because I'm a Zionist, but simply because Israel exists and has existed for a long time. I think Chomsky says, you can't really get away from a two-state solution now there. So actually, you have to start from where you are. If you're going to be pragmatic about anything, we are where we are. Where do we go from here?
Well, I think, Roger, I think there are a few people who you wouldn't be prepared to sit down and have a chat with. Very few. I mean, I can't even think of who they are. In fact, no, I can probably name a couple of them. we might have mentioned one or two of them today.
George Monbiot.
Yeah. Okay. So, but yeah, I think even though Mr. Icke and his son will make points that you agree with, I think some of the things associated with that, there's problems because once you cast the net that wide, you're just going to have problems. And this is the subject that we're talking about. Once you just open the door. So, for example, the QAnon thing, one of my friends is deeply into QAnon.
Mm-hmm.
And when I hear the word bloodlines, for example, not far away from the word Rothschild in a sentence, I'm switching off. If I heard the word Rothschild Bank and the names of the partners and some of the investments they had, I'm listening because that's real. But once you start talking about something, it's the vagueness that I can't stand.
Well,
it's the vagueness. It's the kind of like anything that comes out of my mouth is probably right. That's a bit far for me. And so that is the problem with some of the people that we've been speaking about today, is that when they open their mouths, then it's a case of, they're not that bothered about how right or wrong they are. And if you've been lied to consistently, that's how you're going to sound when you say, I've had enough of the lies. So I understand that. Well, and I'm okay with the fact that you would sound like that. But the point at which you go from sounding like that to being lionized and being some authority figure on stuff, I mean, I appreciate you're going to have a resistance. But I mean, for example, I'm a Sri Lankan Tamil, currently still pretending to be British as I was born here. But there was a war in Sri Lanka, and you would have kids being given guns and cyanide pills financed by us over here. But you'd also supposedly have the intellectual division, with the IRA and Sinn Féin and all this kind of stuff. So you're supposed to have this kind of separation. Now, where is Kate, if that's her name, on this? Is she representing the intellectual front, or is she representing the the client-facing front, as it were? And that's cool. I appreciate you're going to have distinctions between the two. And some people, for example, in some movements will be the ones saying, okay, we're going to go and kill them over there. And other people will say, right, this is how we're going to do our strategy for our PR. So I don't know what she is in that movement. And the same with David Icke, and the same with all these other people. I don't know what they are, if it's George or Mark or the other George or whoever. People are, Roger, people are playing different roles. And, that's all well and good. But when we get back down to pure facts and thinking about what to do next, then, yeah. So Leveson, do you remember the Leveson thing? Mm-hmm. And the whole thing about phone hacking and that type of thing. And so when there were the arguments about whether or not to regulate the press, I am guessing that you, given your extreme love of freedom, if you don't mind me saying it like that, and debate, I'm guessing that you would be saying, actually, I don't really think we should be having press regulation in the way that it appears to be proposed. Maybe we should carry on having people going to court and stuff, but press regulation, I don't know. so there was that whole question of press regulation. And I remember coming across a book written by somebody probably of spiked ex-lefty who becomes what I would call a corporate shill. And he wrote a book called There's No Such Thing as the Free Press, which I thumbed through. And one of the points that he made, do you remember how you were talking about Daniel Defoe before? Mm-hmm. One of the points that he made was, I think it's, I don't know if is it Cobden, Hazlitt, some of these people from before, possibly Wilkes, people who were doing pamphlets 200 years ago, not everything that they said was true. Or for example, you look at the academic world, don't you? And so some people are really good on certain things and not very good at the other stuff. And if you have a free press, sometimes you're going to have a newspaper saying things that just isn't true, or things that just aren't true. And that's almost part and parcel of what you get in a free society. And the idea that you have self-regulation, external regulation, and the courts, this is roughly what we're talking about. And so then afterwards, we have this culture here where the BBC is just labeling everybody a QAnon conspiracy theorist if they question the figures. Personally, I don't think as many people are dying of coronavirus as we're being as is being suggested to us. Yeah, I don't think there's any justification for the excessive lockdown measures. I think it would be much better if people just got told, listen, if you're worried, then don't go out, and protect yourself, and we can arrange for you to have your food delivered to you, and stuff like that. That is what I would think is sensible. But I mean, going away from that, going back to the way we're talking about the labeling of everything, I think it's a problem, but at the same time, full stop. But I think it's also important not to simply say, because I'm usually the one throwing the stones, and I'm aware that when I am doing that, it doesn't mean I've got all the answers. It just means I'm throwing the stones.
Right. Okay. So, I think a free press is important, and but I also think citizen journalism is important. I think that I think comment sections and discussion sections in newspapers and on the BBC are incredibly important and have deteriorated. That's why there's such a thing as off Guardian, is because the Guardian isn't where comment is free, or whatever they say.
May I just be triggered for 1 second?
Mm-hmm.
So freedom of speech, right? So someone delivers a class that didn't go very well in France and has his head chopped off on the way home. Then afterwards, okay, so whatever. Then afterwards, yesterday, in the Guardian, in the comments section, I went to the opinion, sorry, not in the comments section, I went to the opinion section. Agnès Poirier, French journalist, lives in Paris, writes a thing saying, this teacher, oh my God, we love history teachers. He's the best. And he was just trying to civilize people. Come on. So obviously I didn't read it. And then I go and I look to the comment section. There was no comment section in an article about freedom.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Are we surprised?
No, but I just thought I'd point it out. I mean, we're on the same side again on this. It's
yeah.
But I mean, that's the kind of thing that's going to make me go into the arms of David Icke.
The gentleman here is Mark, and I can't. My screen has frozen here, so. But I think we're still pushing out our discussion. Occupy, on my contention, agree with Mark Windows, and that's my source. I wasn't involved. I followed it quite closely. I was already living in Sweden when it was all going on.
Okay.
And what's it called? Indian Indiano, who's from Cardiff. He did a song called "What You're Gonna Do" and posted it on David's blog, and David blogged it because it is very good. Talking about zombie bankers and stuff like that.
Okay.
So shout out to Indian Indiano, who's still, it's got loads of views on YouTube. That if it's still up.
Okay, I'll look it up.
Russell Brand's film, The Emperor's New Clothes, which basically is suppressed. It's on my BitChute channel. It's well worth watching. This is coming out of the austerity initiative, talking about banking and about no bankers were sent to jail for what happened in 2008. The reframing of that, the revisionism that's gone on about that austerity regime that was imposed after the financial crisis. 10 years after, I was looking the other day, there was a film that was produced with all the culprits, Paulson, Geithner, and Bernanke, all basically, you know, sort of saying, oh, nothing to see here, it wasn't us. You know, it was all those wicked people that borrowed that money that they couldn't afford. I mean, it was classic
victim blaming. Yeah,
exactly.
Victim blaming. She shouldn't have worn that short skirt.
Exactly. So effectively, this idea of the memory hole and then the revisionist, you know, this is what we're going to print instead. I mean, it's all very 1984. But what I'm saying is there are precedents to this type of disruption of a popular resistance to unpopular establishment measures. And unpopular establishment measures which aren't supported by evidence are face masks, lockdowns, compulsory vaccinations, okay, and also the very idea that there had been a pandemic. That it's I just started watching before we started this the latest Max Egan thing on BitChute, where Max is talking. There's basically a cartoon strip appearing, talking about these things. It's very good. I like watching Max Egan stuff. Now, my basic point is where you've got two people saying, "Well, let's question this. Let's do some critical thinking. Let's criticize the information, the data, the key actors in the narrative which we are all being insisted upon, coerced to comply with." So your Valences, your Whitties, your Bill Gates, your Matt Hancocks, your Boris Johnsons, your Professor Neil Ferguson's, all manner of experts that are rolled out to support this central government propaganda narrative. Okay, right? So people that come up against that so say, well, hold on, we're not happy with that. Of course, everybody isn't going to agree on all of the points of question. And this answers your question on Kate here. Where does she stand on these broader issues? You know, where does she go from expertise into bumper sticker grabbing, as it were? We all do that. You know, what do they say, that the hardest word in the English language is no. Perhaps the hardest sentence is I don't know. And there seems to be a resistance that we all seem to have these days of saying I don't know. You know, you have to be a denier. You know, denial is a form of saying, you know, I know enough to deny. It's not that I'm a devout I don't knower. You know, you say, well, look, I don't know. You know, maybe you do know, and good luck to you. Well, convince me. You know, why are you right and this person over here wrong? You know.
Well, you know what? That's actually also part of what happened with Occupy, because Occupy, like the World Trade Organization, is a consensus-based organization, and so if one person doesn't get it, then it doesn't go. It doesn't happen. And I don't know if that's what the Extinction Rebellion sortition utopia is pushing. But I feel like I'm interrupting you again because you wanted to say.
Well, that's a point on consensus that you make there. The simple thing, I mean, I had these things open just to click through, but I think essentially, you know, we've discussed this general idea, right, that there are legitimate voices with valid arguments against this claimed consensus narrative, okay, which if you're against that narrative, you must have some sort of mental deficiency, which we can conveniently label as conspiracy theorist. Okay. And here we have the BBC putting a woman's son and interviewing them at length, 18-minute interview, voice interview, a 3-minute video interview, actually saying, you know, look, even her own son thinks she's mad. That's what they're basically saying.
I mean, maybe they think that there are Republicans abroad who need to be, you know, set straight, and that they might end up watching that. I don't know. Because if you think about it, I mean, obviously it has some influence here, but the big story is the American election. I mean, I find that the BBC avoid telling us things. I mean, I don't know if that's on purpose or not, but, you know, things that really ought to be said. So, for example, you know, the school meals. When the school meal vote happened, then they have what the papers say not long after that at 10:30. They didn't mention it at all, even though it was slightly mentioned in one of the papers. They didn't mention it. It took about 24 hours for it to really get mentioned, because the internet was melting as a result of the fact that they said, you know, like, many people are unemployed. I think they're talking about the number of the stats for child poverty are huge, and it just wasn't getting mentioned. So going back to your thing about, if there's something important and people want to talk about it and they're not able to talk about it, or when they do talk about it, they're getting labeled. What's the process whereby that thing still gets talked about? Because it's very easy with our parliamentary system and court system and all these things for issues to get shut down, for voices to be silenced, and that's it. So, I mean, I wonder if you're proposing some sort of a Nassim Taleb anti-fragile approach to communication as opposed to finance. And that perhaps Web3 and BitChute, therein lies the response.
Well, actually, for that to happen, people have to get outside of the Google browser or the mainstream browser thing. So Microsoft Edge, Google Chrome, variations thereof, even Mozilla Firefox to a certain extent. Although I find that's a better browser than
Are they narrowing people's imagination and their information options? Is that what you're saying?
They literally use something called twiddling to game the algorithm
to tell you what to think, to tell you what you're allowed to think, basically, in a way.
Yeah, to control the information which you process, and, you know, basically the suggestibility. The best way to get anyone to believe anything is to make them think it was their own idea in the first place.
Which is what me searching on Google does, right?
Well, yeah.
I go, oh, I'm really interested in this, and they give me another. If they just give me a press release, don't they? This is what's really bad sometimes. On Google,
experiment anyone can do is do a search on Chrome and do a search on DuckDuckGo, even in the Chrome browser, just using the Chrome browser, but the DuckDuckGo.
It's completely different, isn't it? Right.
It's completely different. Or use Dissenter, or use Brave. Use one of the use Start Page. I mean, I customize the Start Page called Hypatia's iBrowser, which has got all sorts of links to all sorts of what's the word? Dissent. What dissenters called? What was it? What were they called in the Soviet Union? People that not militants, but in the Soviet Union. What was
dissidents?
Dissidents. Yeah, all sorts of dissident stuff. You know, that's what you want. You want a bit of dissidence. That's what you want.
Well, yeah, I think it's good to be able to go outside what they were being given, because if you're not, then you're not really thinking, are you? I remember once, I think I might have typed out something like COVID-19. We're talking in March or coronavirus into Google, particularly Google News, or it may even have been Google, and you can adjust Google so that you have 250 on each page. It was about 4 pages. That was it.
That was it.
Yeah. I wasn't allowed more. They'd limited it. There was a perimeter, and whatever you could see was inside that, and there were obviously things outside that, and I couldn't get it. So how am I supposed to find, if someone's putting something up, how am I supposed to find it?
Yeah.
If it's not been given to me.
Yeah. I mean, but just to recap, because I think we ought to wrap up. I mean, it's 1 hour 34 minutes according this.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So the BBC thing, Sebastian attacking his mother, Kate and Anna Breeze having their separate spate. Precedents for opposition groupings, movements, call them what you will, being infiltrated. Yeah. So terms to take away: gatekeepers, controlled opposition, useful idiots, fifth columnists, quislings, agent provocateur, nudging, Gert Gigerenzer, what you would loosely call mind control, and for that sort of thing, what Century of Self, Adam Curtis, hypernormalization. I'm surprised more people aren't talking about that as a film and
at the moment.
At the moment, when everyone's talking about the new normal, hypernormalization, new normal. Yet again.
Well, you were talking. I mean, we didn't explore it, but you were talking about the Great Reset as well. So it's very interesting, also the way that climate change, something which was, you'd wave the flag for that on the left, and now suddenly the large corporates are saying, oh, the EU Green Deal, all of this stuff is now coming at you from top.
So on that, what I would say is that the reaction to a false alarm on a pandemic, by the reaction to that false alarm continuing and deepening, it tends to suggest that another agenda has been introduced into the game, as it were, on the basis that, well, better luck next time. This is Bill Gates' second pandemic or biological word that he's touting now. It's kind of like,
when was the last one? In March? You mean the last one was in March? He's doing it again today?
No, but Joe Biden mentioned dark winter in the last presidential debate, and the dark winter exercise was an exercise of a smallpox attack on the United States that was war gamed. Actually, I think it was 3 months before the 9/11 attacks, so it was in late 2000 that dark winter was an exercise not dissimilar to Event 201.
But don't tell me Gates had anything to do with that.
Yeah, he funded. Well, dark winter. I don't.
Because he was still running Microsoft. He was still running Microsoft at the time, wasn't he?
The common vector on dark winter and Event 201 is John Hopkins University, not Bill Gates. Bill Gates did fund the Event 201, but the dark winter, the common party, it is John Hopkins University, who are involved in both of them. I mean, other people that would have been involved as well, but sure. It's a category of wargaming, not dissimilar to in false flag events. There we are, another conspiracy theory. Oh my God, false flags. Do they happen? Gulf of Tonkin, which we mentioned earlier. Yes, of course they do. Operation Gladio. Professor Daniel Ganser. Look him up. Look at Gladio.
You were talking about you were talking the Human Laboratory, weren't you? The Horizon documentary that
in 1995, which again it is on the which is on the theme of
contraception, isn't it, and vaccines?
Yes, but birth control and sterilization by foul means, involuntarily, not even coerced, just done. Basically convenient side effects that the administrators of the supposed contraception are fully aware of. and there are several themes of population control all mixed into that, eugenics, whatever, in that Horizon documentary.
Well, I'm glad you've raised this, because I'd just like to clarify: are you one of those people who would like to cut the population of the planet down to 500 million?
No, not at all. I'm not. I'm a cornucopian. So the famous argument on this was between an academic whose surname was Simon and Paul Ehrlich, and they had a bet. And Simon is a cornucopian. I believe we can do much more with less, in line with the philosophy of the guy that invented the geodesic domes.
Buckminster Fuller.
Yes. So Buckminster Fuller says, tensegrity, doing more with less. And that kind of philosophy of abundance doesn't work in a capitalism and a financialized capitalism predicated upon the idea of scarcity, and particularly scarcity of the monetary unit, which, it's about creating demand for the monetary unit and centralizing control, as opposed to realizing the full potential of production and human creativity. So I'm a cornucopian, and a lot of people talk about digital technology, computer science and stuff like that. I would say what never gets talked about, people talk about AI and stuff. Well, I was talking to my wife about it when I was dropping her off earlier about artificial intelligence. And what you don't have is artificial sentience, and sentience and creativity is not something.
Yeah, you can't do that, can you?
No. What I sort of, where I was trying to describe this morning, I sort of said, in a file download world where you download the file and that's it. So we were talking about whether you could download a file to learn to play the guitar, say, or to play music. And the point is that what you would then become is a record player. You'd be replicating stuff that's already there, and any variation has to be some form of probability, stochastic sort of.
It's like the GM food monoculture, isn't it?
Random number generator type.
It's like the GM food monoculture, isn't it, Roger? It's like the monoculture.
I'm not sure how
you just repeat it. It's the same thing.
Well,
there's no variety.
Over and over, but the point is, you can still have variety, but how do you generate the variety? Spontaneous.
If you can't generate it, you're not going to have it, are you?
Spontaneous creativity in art, is not from a random number generator within us. It's from our sentience. I mean, I'm not going to get into Pelagius and free will and stuff like that, but it's a free will thing. And so again, determinism and free will and authoritarianism and libertarianism, they are certainly, in my own mind, much more real than a left-right explanation of the world. As labels, they work up to a point, but they're not. I mean, I don't believe in universals, as it were, but when all of these things are kind of going into the pot at the moment because of artificial intelligence, so-called artificial intelligence, which on my is download culture as opposed to artificial sentience that doesn't and can never exist. Get away from the idea that we're being told that we need to do something, one, because we all need to protect ourselves from this dreaded lurgy, COVID-19. But two, we can also solve our own wounds inflicted on the planet, climate change as well at the same time. Win-win, isn't it wonderful? I.e. Green New Deal, Great Reset. Right? And yet...
And we can take some psychedelics as well.
Well, there, that's the Brave New World Soma crew, as opposed to the 1984 lot, which is where, you know, that's the precariat. So, you know, they're not mutually exclusive. The one in the middle is probably, and the best thing between the two is H.G. Wells's The State of Man. If you read that, H.G. Wells wasn't from the same privileged background as Huxley and Blair, or George Orwell, Eric Blair. H.G. Wells was a Kent grammar school boy, you know, whatever. And if you read his non-fiction output, you get a real good sense of all the arguments that are still going on today, I think, including arguments to do with theosophy and the Theosophists, which is a rich well from which David Icke draws from. So, I mean, that broadens it out more than the simple point I wanted to do by having a chat today, Ranjan. And the simple point is that people with genuine questions and criticisms of the consensus narrative, which isn't a majority narrative, the only consensus exists with a very narrow band of elitists and technocratic government globalist type people who believe in a certain modern model of governance and a policy framework supporting their model of governance, okay, which isn't something that ever gets done through the ballot box, or which people aren't going to vote for the Jack vote stamping on their face forever, to paraphrase Orwell. But people aren't down for that, not unless there's some sort of sadomasochist, so there are some sadomasochists, of course, so maybe they would, but so that's kind of where we're at, really. So the simple point is that who is, or what is the danger here? What is the object of criticism? It's not each other. Whilst you might not agree with each other's arguments and may have different policy prescriptions, right, your united or your shared interests are actually in challenging these things being slipped in by the back door while you're arguing. So, Kate, Anna, and people that are cleaving to either of those two tribes, if you will, they're much better off talking to each other. Now, there was a very interesting thing I saw the other day. There was a protest, I think it was in Berlin, where
Roger, just 1 second. Sorry, just 1 second. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So there were two groups of protesters, one in favor of lockdown, the other not, or maybe it was masks, whatever it was. And they actually started to talk to each other, just to sort of say, well, hold on a second, what are you saying? What are we saying? Right. And the police broke up the discussion that was going on. There are lots of pictures on the internet of Orthodox Jews and Palestinians in Israel actually hugging each other. There's lots of interfaith stuff with Islam as well, where people are working on that. And I mean, someone who's really involved in the interfaith thing with Israel is Nico Piled, the general's son. He wrote a famous book about that, and you see victims of these conflicts that go into hot war. Okay, they have a lot in common, but their common enemy isn't each other. It's it's a puppet master idea. Now, of course, when you start then using those sorts of images,
yeah,
analogies, images, whatever.
Yeah, you get into trouble. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You know, it's a minefield.
You get accused.
You'd be accused of sort of saying, "Oh, are you alluding to,
Yeah,
the
sure.
Jewish conspiracy, the this conspiracy, the that conspiracy?" Well, actually, I'm involved in a great big conspiracy, and it's the conspiracy of the human race to actually get along together and live a happier and more contented life, and so let's cook that one up. Let's start conspiring for that, shall we? And let's see where that goes. When does that stop being a conspiracy and actually turns into a reality? A conspiracy reality. Let's aim for that. Let's not argue with each other or whatever. It seems to me that there's there is a common interest in actually opposing this draconian authoritarian fairy tale that we all have to be living in a fear of each other, that we're all a bag of germs, we're all going to infect each other. We don't care about each other, and we don't give a shit about the planet, and we're all these bad, terrible people and all the rest of it. Hell, I mean, I've met some bastards in my life, but not that many of them, and it serves very narrow interests that are actually driving through a very unpopular agenda, right? And it suits their purposes for people like Kate and Anna, and other people that are maybe battling for their little corner of the social media pile, as it were. It is counterproductive, and it's naive to think that there aren't people actually egging that on, like 77 Brigade, but also,
all sorts.
Yeah, I mean, it patently, of course, you're going to do that. It's not, of course they're going to do it. Of course they would do that, but come on, let's not be so daft as to fall for it, people, and let's just be a little bit more discerning, and let's not go around accusing everybody like Mark here of being a police officer, or George of being an MI5 officer, or whatnot and the other. Maybe they are.
I've made no accusations today. I'd just like to say.
The point is, it's possible that they could be. Why would a government want to bring in a bill legalizing illegal stuff for people pursuing government business?
Yeah, well, let's not go there now. I'd like to talk about that another time, but yeah, definitely.
Right. All right. Well, look, I'll give you a call on Skype when I reboot my machine, and let's see if that has managed to stream.
Okay, brilliant.
It has, because
I think it has. Yeah.
The rest of my machine has jammed up. So if anybody's watched this, or if anybody does,
thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching. Cheers, Ranjan.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.
When are we going to beat him?
3:30, Rasmus.
Yeah, no, you said 3 in the car.
Well, we're picking Rhiannon up at 4, mate. So, let me just get this.